Europe is home to many fucking fantastic filmmakers. And when I say this, your mind might jump straight to Ingmar Bergman or Francois Truffaut or Fellini, but my mind jumps straight to Michaelangelo Antonioni. What's so special about Antonioni? His films, in contrast to the others, are the fucking definitions of truth and honesty. I mean, they're like portraits of life in their truest forms, meaning his films are grounded in reality, contain little to no dramatization, and they all ride on very natural pacing. Now, I've only seen about 9 of his movies: I Vinti, Les Amici, L'Avventura, La Notte, L'Eclisse, Red Desert, Blow Up, Zabriskie Point, and The Passenger. So, what I say about him as a filmmaker really has no bearing on objective analysis, nor will this be a full-on analysis of each and every single one of his movies. I don't have fucking time for that. Instead, I'll touch upon common aspects from his films, and use them to understand him as a filmmaker, and explain why he's so special. Okay, so the main films that really give insight to Antonioni as a filmmaker are L'Avventura, La Notte, and L'Eclisse, because they all brought the key components of his style of directing to fruition. And it all started with L'Avventura. Came out in 1960, and not a single fucking person liked it. When it screened at the Cannes Film Festival for the first time, there was so much animosity that Antonioni and his muse at the time, Monica Vitti, had to flee the theater. It was a fucking disaster. And to be honest, it's no surprise why people were so hostile. The movie abandons the original premise midway and never bothers to address any of the questions about the shift in focus or the changes in the characters. Now, imagine that for roughly 2.5 hours with natural, slow pacing, plenty of long, continuous shots, and characters who are reserved and not very expressive. Yeah, the movie, truthfully, it's just a huge test of patience. But the weird thing is that the movie was met with praise and love upon subsequent showings. So it became a success, commercially and critically, and began to influence art cinema around the world. People began to finally appreciate the fact that L'Avventura was unconventional. Unconventional how? Unconventional in which it showcased everything visually. Now, there's a key word right there, visual. No, not fancy, shiny, elaborate, colorful, or technical cinematography. I'm talking shots that are truth. And that's a good way to describe most of the films from Antonioni that I've seen, shots of truth. Instead of verbal exposition or a narrative with a point A and point B, Antonioni's films are more like portraits of people who don't act like people, but they are people. Actually, no, let me put it this way. Movies create narrative streets and roads that characters have to abide by and walk on in a specific order in order for the story to progress. But for Antonioni, his characters walk the streets and roads they desire to walk on, while the story completely builds around their own actions. Basically, his characters live without the restrictions of narrative because it's their own adventures that invent the narrative. Here are some examples, and I'm going to do this without getting too deep just yet. In La Notte, main character Lydia breaks away from a party of intellectuals and starts roaming the streets of her town, simply because she feels as if she doesn't belong there. And this is a long sequence of her wandering aimlessly before returning back to the main focus of the movie. In L'Eclisse, main character Vittoria meets her opposite at a stock exchange because he's her mother's stockbroker. But when we get to him, the movie breaks away momentarily and we literally focus on the mass hysteria of the stock market before returning back to the main characters. And fuck, don't even get me started on the ending of the movie. Oh, and Zabriskie Point. The two main characters abandon their situations and spend a majority of the movie taking refuge in the hills. And even in The Passenger, one of Antonioni's more plot-heavy films, the movie has an element of a road trip movie where Jack Nicholson goes and roams wherever he wants to go. Now, on the surface, that may sound a bit boring and, fuck, dare I use this word, pretentious to a lot of people, but believe me, the style of his films don't go without merit. I mean, just because his movies aren't plot-driven, it doesn't mean there isn't a purpose. There is a purpose, and no, it's not some grand, complex, novel idea. No, it's something we can all relate to. To give you an example, look at his trilogy. They're all about relationships between estranged characters, and usually they're surrounded by people, strangers or friends or whatever, that just make them feel even more alienated and isolated. No, let me give you just one more example. Let's look at La Notte in particular. Giovanni and Lydia, the main characters. Giovanni is a writer. Lydia is not. Giovanni is constantly surrounded by intellectuals and thought-provoking people who are all about philosophy and profound ideals and all that stuff, but they aren't Lydia's crowd. So not only is she disconnected from her husband, but the environment she's surrounded by literally reinforces the fact that she's alienated and feels alone all the time. And the things I said about characters who follow their own path, well, here's where it comes into play. She breaks away from her husband's environment and begins wandering aimlessly, and the funny thing here is that she finally feels something again. She feels, for lack of a better word, content. She sees children, people walking, macho men acting like asses, people firing rockets into the sky, and even here and there she feels nostalgic in some areas. It's real fucking life she feels. It's very simple and bare and non-eventful, yeah, sure, but those simple pleasures are giving her what she isn't getting at home with Giovanni. Contentment, satisfaction, a sense of belonging, life, and living, she wants to feel these things with Giovanni. She's a faithful woman and she tries, even though Giovanni just continues to keep her in the dark until it smacks him and her in their faces. Now, that's just one element of the movie. I'm not going to give the entire movie an analysis. I was just trying to bring some focus onto how the movie works and Antonioni in general. But just in relation to everything I just said, we've all felt like we've been alienated by our group and surroundings, and a lot of us have been in positions where the person or people we either love or admired took us for granted, and nobody likes being pushed into a dark corner by the people they care about. And the truthful, cold, natural, daunting presentation of these familiar feelings in Antonioni's films are what make them so great, in my opinion, or at least easy to appreciate. And the reason I say this is because he captures all of those feelings in their rawest form. Think of it like this, not every story of alienation and isolation and disconnection between characters, it's not always dramatic, it's not always hyperbolic, it's not always exciting. Sometimes it's a slow and steady process of realization. Sometimes it's gradual, subtle, inevitable, even dreadful, in a sense where this void that you want to patch up and fill up between you and someone else, you can't do it. It's destined to fall apart. And even though I'm mainly attributing those themes to his trilogy, what I'm really trying to push here is that element of truth in reality, in his other films, like let's go with Blow Up and Zabriskie Point and The Passenger. Even in those films where they take a more fictional standpoint than the other trilogy with La Ventura, La Note, and so on, they still also serve to showcase something we can all understand, albeit in a different context and a different light. Essentially, what I'm trying to say here is that his movies are human. He doesn't want you to focus on some contrived plot or anything that's going to distract the viewer from the emotional core of his movies. What he wants you to focus on is the weight of the world all of the characters live in. He wants you to feel the emotional capacity between characters, or the lack thereof that should be there. And not necessarily just that, but taking his movies away how we take things in life as we see it. Discoveries, relationships with people, the world in its condition, personal experiences, and the weight that comes with it all. He's asking you to watch the truth of humanity, life and its estrangement, its pleasures, and its uncertainty, with no advisors or guidelines as to what will come next, because that's not how it works in reality. In reality, we don't plot things, or at least we don't plot everything. We just simply see them and take them as they are. Actually, you know what? It's almost comparable to Richard Linklater. Why do people love Dazed and Confused and the Before trilogy and Slacker and Boyhood? Because they're true movies. Slacker gives a truthful look to a rather weird generation of Generation X kids in Texas. And Dazed and Confused, as fun as that movie is, it's loved because of how it's honest in its depiction of community and social groups with kids. I mean, the thing is, it does such a great job in its depiction that we feel like we were there with that group. And if not, then we wish we were there with that group. We wish we could recreate a night like that. And the Before movies, they capture the beauty and difficulty of a relationship building over the course of 18 years without any forced conventions of romance. It's truthful. People meet, talk, get to know each other, fall in love if it's mutual, and face difficulty in maintaining that connection with circumstances that aren't totally in their favor. People love Boyhood because it's a true look in growing up in the 21st century. The impacts of technological advancements, the people we meet, the people our parents meet, the environments we grow up in, and The Everlasting Effects of the Changes in the 21st Century. All of those films achieve truth without feeling the need to throw some contrived story or rehashed convention to get their point across. They're true, honest, and raw, and the fact that they do such a damn good job at portraying their honesty and truth is why they evoke deeper responses as opposed to a scripted story formed on an assembly line. Not to say that those can't work either, but you know, usually it's deeper when it comes from a deeper place with no boundaries in truth and honesty. Now, I realize that Antonioni and Linklater are two completely different filmmakers, but their approach to their films and life, you know, it's very honest and natural. And while they aren't the only filmmakers who make honest and true films, they're the two who really, really excel at it. But given the age difference, I guess we can say Antonioni is one of the more OG filmmakers of this type. Alright, so to bring this video to a close, I'm just going to make a statement and say that there are many filmmakers out there who admire this about Antonioni, his approach to filmmaking. To give you some examples, La Note was one of Kubrick's favorite movies. Kurosawa called him one of the most interesting filmmakers, not exactly sure if that's a good or bad thing, and Andrei Tarkovsky said that he was one of his favorite filmmakers. And when you compare those two and how a lot of their movies take place in real time, I guess you can kind of see where the influence for Tarkovsky to shoot his movies in real time came about. But aside from that, there are also plenty of filmmakers who didn't really care for Antonioni. Bergman didn't care for him. Bergman actually thought he was pretty damn boring, even though he liked La Note and Blow Up. Orson Welles actually said the same thing. He didn't really care for him, thought he was boring. And Francois Truffaut, he fucking hated Antonioni. Truffaut and Antonioni, they had a nasty feud. Funny, but just nasty. But aside from that, Antonioni's style, it's not for everybody. I realize that. But I say this, if you want something different, or if you like movies that are raw and natural and honest and human, and they give very honest and heartbreaking depictions of relationships between people and life in general, if you like that depressing and true shit, then why not just give them a go?